Subtitling. Zweites, deutsches Fernsehen. 112, 2025. We are in the fourth, day 281 since the full-scale invasion began. Welcome to the Daily Situation Report. Subscribers and channel members are uniting more each day. Let's give the channel the weight and reach we need to survive in this media world. Thank you for that, and let's continue with the report. The Ukrainian armed forces are releasing new images of their defensive positions behind Bakrovsk. This is just one of the many kilometers meant to slow down the Russians even more than they already are, because the Ukrainian strategy is to bring the Russians to a point where they eventually can't keep fighting. And by now we can also see the effects this war is having in Russia. We already looked at all of that in yesterday's situation report. I'll just refer to yesterday's report without repeating it all here. So this is the first line. So even before any trench systems for infantry, it's easy to see that the order of the defenses is almost the same everywhere. First, there's an anti-tank ditch that's supposed to prevent vehicles from driving through. If you somehow manage to fill it up with earth or debris and maybe make it passable with a temporary bridge, there's another anti-tank barrier right after it that's supposed to stop the vehicles. Next is a dragon's teeth line with concrete blocks linked by wire ropes to keep them from being pushed aside. This line was also reinforced with barbed wire, making it difficult for infantrymen and therefore also for engineers to cut a path through. After that, there are again 2 rows of anti-tank ditches and the corresponding anti-tank obstacles. So it can be assumed that mines could be laid behind the second embankment, just like in other sections. Only behind this first line of fortifications are the shelters for soldiers on the Ukrainian side, and therefore also for artillery observers and drone pilots. We won't just sit around and twiddle our thumbs while the Russians overcome one obstacle after another. Instead, we'll be observing and attacking with all means at our disposal the entire time, if necessary. In places where there is no such defensive line, since you also need passages so you don't lock yourself out, they are kept as short as possible and as rare as necessary. Here, the Ukrainians rely on increased control by infantry soldiers to turn the small openings into dangerous bottlenecks. At least that's the theory behind the defensive effort at this point. This looks like a typical drone interception video, which we've seen so many times before. But in the last frames, you can see an attachment on the long-range drone from the typical head. The Russians simply mounted an R-60 anti-aircraft missile here. Here's another picture. The time is observed with observed means, but all means are observed, but all means observe the time. Time is observed by all means. But the time is observed by all means. All means are observed, but the whole time is observed by all means. The time is observed by all means. Ultimately, these Shahed drones use jet engines instead of propellers. According to Wild Hornets, this is supposed to be the first successful shoot-down of such a drone by another defense drone. Last night, Ukraine experienced one of its largest airstrikes, with Dnipro hit particularly hard. On the left, you can see a ballistic Iskander missile strike in a residential area, targeting the same city. Near Pokrovsk, there is some trouble between the Russian armed forces. According to reports from several Russian bloggers, the responsible commanders had to issue behavioral guidelines at short notice to ensure basic procedures and to contain conflicts between neighboring units. The background is ongoing problems with training, leadership, and also coordination. The instructions are directed at several units in the same operational sector and emphasize the need for a minimum level of cooperation. Among other things, it mentions a lack of coordination, insufficient camouflage, improper handling of equipment, unauthorized taking of gear, which is a very nice way to put it. It also points out theft as well as repeated issues between drones and infantry forces. It is also reported that some units have delayed or refused orders from above, citing the danger posed by drones, and that, in the darkness, there were repeated accidental discharges of firearms at their own forces. A comment by the blogger Sviatoslav Golikov classifies these incidents as a result of structural deficiencies. He points to inadequate training and, above all, a lack of leadership quality at the unit level and general overburdening of the units in the frontline sector. The publication of the recommendation is presented as very necessary from the Russian point of view, since similar problems are also being observed in other areas. So in plain English, uncoordinated units get in each other's way, hardly coordinate with each other, and cause avoidable losses of their own. While they all seem to do whatever they want without coordinating with their neighboring subunits, a major ongoing issue for the Russians is their lack of a non-commissioned officer level. They have a lot of enlisted ranks and a lot of officer ranks. Russian officers typically command up to 15 enlisted men directly, a situation that would be uncomfortable and impossible in other armies. An officer's role isn't to directly lead soldiers. That's what non-commissioned officers do. But the Russians have had a big deficit in that area even before the war. The reason isn't that nobody wants to become a non-commissioned officer or that they don't train any. The real reason is that those who have completed their compulsory military service aren't there long enough to be promoted to the rank of non-commissioned officer, or they lose interest after experiencing the Russian army. And professional soldiers usually aim for a higher rank than the non-commissioned officer level if they have to stay longer anyway. And as a result, there was a significant shortage of non-commissioned officers, which is still noticeable today. And for exactly this reason, officers often directly lead enlisted personnel themselves, or lead personnel who do not have the proper training to lead. They are left alone and must lead other troops into battle, which often causes problems, as seen here. Fighting continues at Hulia Ipulje. I see a larger movement here, with Russia gaining territory. As usual, they will probably try to cut off Ukrainian logistics, which supplies the units in the city via the T-0401 road. At the same time, there are also attacks on the second axis of attack in the northeast of the city. Here, the Russians are trying to build up pressure and look for an opportunity to get into the town. But that's it for today's daily territorial gains. But not for the other interesting things, because those are coming up next. Bloomberg reports that NATO is preparing to confront Russia with much less United States support. They have no choice. The background is Washington's strategic realignment, with troops to be withdrawn from Europe and security policy priorities shifting much more toward the Asia-Pacific region. Large-scale exercises in Romania, according to the news agency, show that European forces, led by our neighbor France, are now taking over much of the coordination independently. It's a bit embarrassing for Germans, but necessary for Europe. The maneuvers also expose structural weaknesses, particularly in logistics, air defense, reconnaissance, and precision strikes. Over long distances, the alliance remains heavily dependent on the United States, and that urgently needs to change. And I know that it's not something that can be done in just a week or two. Yesterday, I showed you a report about an almost 80% drop in Rosneft's net profit. Here's a better chart about it. A major slump occurred between Q2 and Q3 of 2024 because of sanctions. And then again between the first and second quarters of 2025, when what I like to call the hard sanctions started, basically the increased Ukrainian drone attacks on Russian oil refineries. To make matters worse, there are also the United States sanctions, which made everything a bit more difficult. Special thanks to the Allgäu Crew channel members and Lieutenant Colonel Renicky. As always, thank you for listening. Subscribe, like, comment, and see you in the next report.